Save now, pay more later. Oh, that sounds very tempting. As a CEO, when you hear the phrase technological debt, you are most likely being triggered. You have a feeling this phrase is being used as an excuse for everything, including incompetence. Keep on watching my video, where I'll show you 6 ways in which technological debt can actually have an impact on your project and how you can prevent that. And no more theorizing. I'll actually explain it on a real example of a startup that was intentionally accumulating technological debt, and I'll show you what were the consequences when we had to actually repay it. You see, technological debt doesn't have to always be the bad thing. Sometimes technological debt is actually a part of innovation strategy because it means you're actually making some kind of a trade-off. And startups, they very often use technological debt as a way of getting to the market much quicker, and this is exactly what we are doing. Our resources are very limited, and time, of course, is an issue. So technological debt can actually be a part of the innovation strategy, but remember, you actually have to track it so that you know where you're standing and when to begin to repay it. And this is exactly what we didn't do in this particular case. In Effihub, we wanted to build really good statistics, and we wanted to start with some dashboards that were giving you actually an insight in your full-time consumption and what kind of revenue you're able to generate and things like that. Some of the big modules in our system we've been adding in increments, and that was happening over time. Long story short, some of the fields and functionality around the tasks that we had in our system, they were incompatible with each other. So we could not just make a sum of all the time consumption. We couldn't just sum up all the money being generated as people were actually registering their time. So that was a big problem. Of course, it was possible to fix it in software, but that would mean creating even more spaghetti that would be a maintenance hell in the future. So what happened? At that point, we really had to repay the debts. And that was very sad because instead of actually coming with new features to the market, features that are very important to us, very important to our customers, we had to wait and spend almost 100% of our capacity on repaying the technological debt. Tech debt slows you down. That's true, and I already explained you how it happened in our case. If I was to explain you exactly how it slows you down, technological debt is just like a regular debt. The thing is, it has a compound interest built into it. The more you neglect it, the more you wait with repaying it, yes, the more interest it accumulates. So how can you fix that? Try to prioritize high-impact technological debt that can actually slow you down in the long run. And normally, developers, they can actually identify such high-impacting technological debt traps. Tech debt is a ticking bomb. Luckily, that wasn't our problem, but let me explain. Today, you basically cannot develop any software without relying on some form of third-party libraries. Your source code and your code might be very much okay, but you might have an old library if you haven't been really upgrading all your dependencies, and those dependencies can be actually a source of a problem, of a security breach, and sometimes it happens even with features that you are not using. So the thing is, unaddressed tech debt can actually lead to system vulnerabilities and to data breaches. How to fix that? Well, allocate a little bit of your time for proactive maintenance. That means upgrading all your dependencies and looking on what is happening there. With that tech debt, you can actually cut the dead weight. That's true. This is something we experienced a little bit in our case, because as long as we had the situation that we had before, there was around 2,000 lines of code that were doing some magic. Once we started repaying the debt, all this code went away. The fun part is that code, that was around 2,000 lines. It wasn't really, easy or in any way understandable. That was code that really, it needed to go away. On top of that, if we continued somehow developing in this model that we had before with all the tech debt, that would seriously complicate our WebSocket communication, because then we would have to introduce even more code and more transformers that would complicate the logic on both backend and frontend. So yes, technological debt can seriously degrade the performance of your system. It can lead to longer loading times, and this is something that could be very important for those that rely on SEO. And of course, it can also mean more frequent crashes. What to do? Of course, you could say that, well, you can always take a look at the code and make sure you optimize and streamline things regularly. But this is not exactly a feasible solution. What I really recommend doing is actually investing in tools that will help you monitor the situation. And as soon as you notice that things are going in the wrong direction, that's when you have to take a look on what is happening. Technological debt might prevent you from going into the future. And what happened in our situation? Well, a lot of things got much simpler, and that means that we were able to actually introduce new features in our software almost for free. So addressing technological debt means that your systems actually become adaptable. And when I say adaptable or future-proof, it doesn't always mean that you can upgrade to new libraries or add something new. No. It also means that you can actually build new things in your software that will advance you. So what to do here? Of course, having CI/CD is one part of the solution. The other one is actually to have a good strategy and a person that is in the project and is overlooking a lot of the details and is tracking the technological debt and can see some of the implications that might affect you in the future. That means also making sure your stack is always updated. Save now, pay more later. That wasn't exactly our strategy, because we intentionally decided to cripple our software because we wanted to buy some time and we really needed to go out with new features and new modules. What people forget here is exactly something I mentioned previously, meaning technological debt has a compound interest in it. That means the more you wait, the more interest it accumulates, the more you have to repay back. If you don't believe me, ask any developer the following thing. Would you address the tech debt right now, when you more or less have the structure in your head, or wait 6 months and do it in half a year? If you say to any developer, their thought will be like, oh no, I have to get into all this code again. It's difficult. You have to actually reverse engineer your own brain. And to be honest, the code that we write sometimes, well, it's creative, and we really do know how to make traps for ourselves. It might seem cost effective to delay it and save now, repay later, but the thing is, make sure that you understand it. It will cost you much more in majority of cases. So what to do? Well, if you're not a startup where you intentionally take the technical debt on board, then allocate a little bit of your time to make sure that a little bit of technical debt is addressed every time you work on something. And in the last point, I'll try to explain you why it's so important to work a little bit on it every now and then instead of getting it in one big chunk. Empower your team. Even though we knew exactly what we were doing, intentionally accumulating technological debt, it was still very depressing to be just working on that. Building a lot of features, spending multiple hours, building something, fixing something, making migrations, and seeing absolutely no visible effect of it. I mean, our feature list didn't expand because of that, but we seriously had to invest many hours to make sure everything is correct. Now, the thing is, we are co-founders. We have a different motivation to work on the project. But your developer team? Being a developer means that you're on a form of a mission, and that mission has to have some challenges, because if it's only boring cleaning all day long, believe me, in today's market, your developers, they will very quickly find a new place where they will get a better, more challenging day, and where their mission is actually make them feel fulfilled at the end of the day. So what to do? Exactly what I said in the previous point. Basically, work continually on your systems, improve them, repay the debt every now and then, make sure it's part of your project budget, and allocate some resources to that. Foster a culture so that developers, they highlight and address technological debt themselves. This way, they will have completely different motivation on working and cleaning up the old stuff. You could also schedule regular refactoring sprints. How much should I allocate? I would recommend that you start with 20% and actually measure the impact on your code base, on how your team is responding, and from that 20% go either up or down, but make sure to not be too high for a long period of time, because as I said, this will hit the morale in the team. So technological debt is a lot more complex than we think, and there is a lot of factors that can actually influence it. Sometimes people say things like technological debt is a result of incompetence. Well, that is one of the factors that can influence it, but it's one of many. But it all boils down to the fact awareness. What kind of work are you doing? Are you more like a startup where you really have to run and sprint and you intentionally decide to accumulate technological debt? Or maybe you're running a marathon and you actually have to properly allocate your resources, measure everything, and adjust it as you're running. And I think one of the most important things around technological debt is actually being open about it. The worst technological debt that you can have is a debt that nobody cares about and nobody wants to own. And the thing is, if you're being open about it, it's going to improve the communication, and it's definitely going to make sure that your developers, they are much better prepared for actually repaying it. So now you know the consequences of technological debt. As developers, we know them very well because we often have to deal with them. But the thing is, if you as a CEO know it too now, you can make sure that our work is done better because you can allocate our resources in a much better way, making sure that we are prepared, because exactly like that, the more we can prepare, the more we thrive. Nothing about technological debt is easy. So if you're struggling, if your situation is hard and you would like to have someone to take a look on your project, on your situation, assess it, give you some pointers, help you with a strategy, do not hesitate to contact me.